Now, the next style or architecture that we are going to talk about is a client server, and that's also very common, and you're probably gonna recognize it once I talk about it. That we have one component act as a client and one component act as a server. So the server just provides services. For example, the very common example of the web client server architecture is the web client and web server. Okay, so you have a web server, a component, and a client access services provided by that component. When we're talking about web client and web service, so web client and web server, the client would request the page and the server would provide that page, for example. This is an example service. Okay, now there are several protocols. The web server client are not the only ones, even though they are common. You can have FTP server and client. You can have application server and client. Okay, so there are multiple applications that use a server client application in addition to the web applications. An example, okay, to compare to that, we can have the component. I mean, every component can act as a server, and as a client. So it may act as a server in some occasions, and it may act as a client in other occasions. So in that case, we call it peers, and we provide the capabilities to request and capabilities to provide or response in the same component. So here, we provide the capabilities to request in the client, and we provide the capabilities to response in the server. Okay, so the client generates a request and sends it. The server receives the request, generate the response, and send it to the client, and the client receives that response. Now, when we are talking about peer-to-peer, both the service, both the request capabilities and the response capabilities are implemented in the same class. So it can act as a server and it can act as a client. Okay, an example of the client server is Solstice. Now, Solstice, there is a server that needs to be installed, and then you also need to have a client application installed in your device that you want to connect to Solstice. And so the server that you connect to provides the response capabilities, and the client you have on your device have the request capabilities. So the client would request to share itself or share its screen, and the server would receive that request and actually stream that shared screen. Now, there is an application called TeamViewer. You can try it out. It is peer-to-peer. It provides the same thing, the screen sharing as well. But the same component that you install, the same application that you install, can act as both a client and a server. So if you connect to it as a client, it will take it. If you connect to it as a server, it will also take it. So if you have two devices, you need to install TeamViewer in both of them. Okay, now any of them can act as a client to the other. Okay, so that's the peer-to-peer architecture.